Hey guys, Dantics here. In this Tiny Tina's Wonderlands video, I'm going to go through all 6 of the class's feats, abilities, and skills so you get a better idea of what to pick come release. The classes are the Brrzerker, the Clawbringer, the Graveborn, the Spellshot, the Spore Warden, and the Stabbomancer. When you get a little further into the game, you'll be able to dual class with one primary and one secondary. So after I go through all the skills, I'll go through some potential builds. Alright, let's get right into it, starting with the Brrzerker. Their class feat is Rage of the Ancients. Using any action skill causes a Fate Maker to become enraged, which adds bonus frost damage to all their attacks, which includes their gun damage, their spell damage, their melee damage, any form of damage that you put out. The rage duration does not deplete while an action skill is active and ends if your Fate Maker enters the Save Your Soul, which is essentially where your HP reaches 0 and you get a chance for a second wind like in Borderlands. Activating an action skill while already enraged restores a portion of the raged timer. Now, the 2 action skills that you get to choose from, Dread Wind and Feral Surge. Dread Wind is essentially a barbarian spin, hitting everything with melee damage and makes you move a bit faster and gain slow immunity. Feral Surge is leaping towards a target, slamming down and dealing frost damage to all enemies. But the interesting thing is, it instantly kills non-boss enemies if their total HP is below a certain percentage. Then we have the first tier of passive skills. Ancestral Frost just adds a flat frost damage increase. Then we have Savagery, which increases melee damage and enraged duration. Then we have Unyielding, which gives a percentage of missing health regeneration. While you're enraged, this effect is doubled, and you'll notice this little perk here, while enraged, seems to come up quite a lot in the skills. Then we have the second tier here of skills. The Fate Maker gains increased damage dealt to enemies that are slowed. The closer the enemy is to being frozen, the more damage is increased. Then we have the Fate Maker deals bonus damage and gains increased damage reduction the closer they are to the enemy, so you want to get up close with old ways. Instinct. Reload speed is increased and weapon swap speed is increased, and while enraged, this effect is doubled. These kinds of skills are never exciting, but they have their uses. Next we have the third tier of skills. First is Cold Snap, which just increases your movement speed, increases your frost efficiency, and the effect is increased while enraged. Then we have Unarmored Defense, which is just a 1-point skill. A portion of the Fate Maker's ward is reserved and cannot be restored, but their maximum health is increased by a percentage of the reserved amount. Health can no longer be reserved, so it just makes you, health-wise, more tanky, but rely less on your ward. Generally speaking, most of the time I prefer having a higher ward or shield as it was in Borderlands, but some builds benefit off of a higher health since they'll have health regeneration with some of their skills. Then we have a kill skill. Restore a percentage of your enraged timer and percentage of your maximum health, and there we go, these two work together. Ancient Fury. Maximum health is increased, splash damage is increased. Relentless Rage. For 1 point, if the Fate Maker damages an enemy while in Save Your Soul, which is when their HP is 0, the duration is extended. The amount of extended decreases over time. Killing an enemy while in Save Your Soul will cause the Fate Maker to become enraged. So, it seems like this is another way to be tanky and not to go down. Blast Chill, which is a single point in the 5th tier. Whenever the Fate Maker deals melee damage to an enemy, there's a chance to release a Frost Nova, dealing frost ability damage to nearby enemies. Frost Nova cannot critically hit. Then we have Fire Rate increased, melee attack speed is increased, while enraged, this effect is doubled. Sounds boring, but it'd probably be fairly powerful. Now, the Capstone, Blood of the Fallen. It's a kill skill. The Fate Maker's remaining action skill cooldown is reduced by a percentage. If an action skill is currently active, its duration is extended instead. So this would work with all action skills if you have a secondary class, and if you've gone an action skill specific build. So while you're spinning and killing things, its duration will continue to increase. This could be very, very powerful depending on your build, especially if you've put attribute points into attunement, which is reducing the cooldown of your action skills. Alright, let's move on to the Clawbringer. The Clawbringer's class feat is to have a Wyvern companion. The Clawbringer is accompanied by a Wyvern companion that flies through the environment and attacks enemies with its claws and fire breath. Any increases to the Fate Maker's damage also apply to their companions. Then we have their two action skills, Cleansing Flames, which summons a hammer and slams it to the ground, dealing melee damage and creating a Fire Nova, dealing fire ability damage to all enemies, and the lightning option, Storm Dragon's Judgment. The Fate Maker throws a hammer like Thor, really, and where the hammer ends up, it deals lightning ability damage to all enemies it touches for a duration. If you recall the ability early, the hammer comes back to your hand, refunding a portion of the action skill. The first tier of skills is the Oath of Fire. The Fate Maker deals bonus fire damage with their guns, and their Wyvern companion deals bonus fire damage. Then we have the Oath of Thunder, which is the same with lightning damage. And the middle one is Radiance, which just straight up increases your maximum ward capacity. Then we have Dragon Aura. The Fate Maker is surrounded by a Dragon Aura that grants themselves and all their allies inside it increased elemental damage. So this also applies to co-op and applies to your companions. Then we have Dedication. The Fate Maker gains increased action skill cooldown rate. The higher their ward, the greater their bonus. So not being hit means you'll be able to cool down your action skill a lot faster. The Fate Maker gains damage reduction from all attacks. Additionally, all allies near the Fate Maker gain a chance to reflect their damage back at their attackers as lightning damage. So another tanky ability. Then we have a single point ability, a kill skill, Blastamut's Favor. Killing an enemy with a gun summons a fire orb that seeks out a new enemy, dealing fire ability damage. Killing an enemy with melee summons a lightning orb that seeks out an enemy, dealing lightning ability damage. Very interesting, that one. And then we have another 1 point ability in the tier 4. The Wyvern companion will occasionally shoot fire bolts at enemies, causing damage in an area and leaving a splat. Additionally, the Fate Maker gains increased gun damage, so it's just good for both of you. A Friend to Flame. The Fate Maker's Wyvern companion gains increased damage. Straight up with that one. And then we have another single point. The Wyvern companion will occasionally use its lightning breath on enemies, causing lightning damage that can arc from enemy to enemy. Additionally, the Fate Maker gains increased damage reduction. Just seems like a good ability all around for 1 point. Then we have tier 5. For 3 points, after dealing fire damage, the Fate Maker gains increased critical hit damage. After dealing lightning damage, the Fate Maker gains increased critical hit chance. Then we have Indomitable. The Fate Maker would enter Save Your Soul. Instead, they refill their ward and deal bonus lightning damage for a short time. This skill has a long cooldown, so for a single point, it's essentially a second life with an increase of lightning damage. Then we have the Capstone for 1 point. Whenever the Fate Maker activates an action skill, they call down elemental bolts that deal fire ability damage or lightning ability damage to all enemies. So I'm guessing they will be both fire and lightning striking all around them. Then we have the Graveborn. The Graveborn's class feat is to have a Demi-Lich companion. And this Demi-Lich fires dark magic at enemies, but also fires a Hellish Blast every time you cast a spell. And it casts a Hellish Blast of that spell's element. And we have the two abilities, Dire Sacrifice and Reaper of Bones. Dire Sacrifice has you sacrificing a small portion of your health to deal dark magic around you in an area. Reaper of Bones, it's a buff that fully heals you and lets you deal bonus dark magic damage and leech life from enemies because of it. But you do lose health as the buff goes on. Once the health reaches 0, you just become invulnerable for that for a small duration. It's around 3 seconds, and you restore your health and Reaper of Bones ends. So you can't die during Reaper of Bones, which is a better use of it, but it does increase your damage. Then we have the first tier of passive skills. Just straight up, your maximum health is increased and your leech efficiency is increased. Then we have Essence Drain. It's just a kill skill. Spell cooldown rate is increased for a duration. Then the Fate Maker deals bonus damage for every companion they have. Companion respawn rate is increased. So good for a pet build there. On the second tier, we have whenever the Fate Maker casts a spell, they regenerate health. Dark magic is increased with Dark Pact. Companions deal bonus dark magic damage for a duration. This effect can stack. For 1 point, Dread Covenant. A portion of the damage taken by the Fate Maker is redirected to your Demi-Lich, your companion. When the Fate Maker reaches 1 health, they immediately restore health, sacrificing the Demi-Lich. So one way to stay more tanky. The Fate Maker spell deal bonus dark magic damage with Strain of the Soul. And then we have another kill skill. Chance to summon a Dark Hydra companion, dealing dark magic ability damage to nearby enemies for a duration. So this stacks with all your dark damage buffs. Then we have the 4th tier for a 3-point max kill skill. Maximum health and spell damage are increased for a long duration. This effect can stack. Then we have Punishment. When the Demi-Lich casts Hellish Blast, there's a chance it will be cast again after a brief delay. So a chance to stack up damage if you cast a lot of spells. Then we have the 5th tier, a single point. The Fate Maker gains increased damage dealt and damage reduction to lower their health. Then for 5 points, Blast Grasp. Whenever a Fate Maker deals spell damage, there's a chance to create an explosion, dealing ability damage of the spell's elemental type to nearby enemies. The elemental explosion cannot critically hit. Then we have the Capstone. Casting a spell automatically activates all of the Fate Maker's kill skills. So if you've got a kill skill build with a lot of kill skills picked up here and maybe in your secondary, this could be very powerful. Then we have the next class, the Spellshot. The Spellshot's class feat is Spell Weaving. Casting a spell or reloading a weapon grants the Spellshot a stack of Spell Weaving, which just increases spell damage. Spell Weaving stacks automatically decay. Casting a repeating spell has a chance to award additional Spell Weaving stacks with each repeating cast. So a repeating spell means a spell that has multiple charges on it, so casting multiple charges may stack up Spell Weaving. Then we have their action skills. We have Ambihextrous. The Spellshot may equip an additional spell in their action skill slot, so they can cast 2 spells instead of having a spell and an action skill. Polymorph. The Spellshot turns an enemy into a skeep, which is essentially a floating sheep for a few seconds. If the enemy is immune, the Spellshot just casts a free spell on that enemy. While the Polymorph is active, any player that damages a skeep has a chance to cast a free spell, but this is guaranteed for the Fate Maker that casts Polymorph. The first tier of skills, Spell Sniper. Gain increased spell critical hit chance. Then we have Magic Bullets. A portion of all bonuses that the Fate Maker receives to spell damage is applied to their guns. I can see this being very powerful with dual classes. Then we have just a flat gain increased reload speed. Now that obviously applies very well to Spell Weaving, but it's otherwise a very boring ability. Then we have tier 2, Front of Mana. Gain an increased spell cooldown rate. Gain an increased action skill cooldown rate. Gives you both. Very good. Then we have Mage Armor. Whenever the Fate Maker gains a stack of Spell Weaving, they also restore a portion of their ward, which makes you slightly tankier. Just warming up, gain an increased fire rate for every stack of Spell Weaving. So yes, you are a Spellshot. You're going to be casting spells and firing fast. Now, I don't know why you wouldn't pick this up if you've got a Spellshot. It just seems like it'll turn you into a literal glass cannon, which would be a lot of fun. Alright. Then we have tier 4. Whenever the Fate Maker casts a spell, their guns deal bonus damage of that spell's element for a short time. This effect stacks once per spell. Then we have a 1-point skill, high thread count, gaining increased max spell weaving stacks. Then we have a kill skill. Whenever the Fate Maker kills an enemy, there's a chance their weapon is instantly reloaded. This chance is increased per spell weaving stack. Then we have the tier 5. Whenever you score a critical hit with a spell, deal bonus damage equal to your gun's element, so encourages you to go elemental guns. Then we have 1 slot, 1 kill, gain increased gun damage per spell weaving stack, just very simple. Then we have the Capstone. Gun critical hits have a chance to instantly reset all spell cooldowns. This skill has a short cooldown, so this means you will be slinging those spells like an absolute madman. And finding a way to increase your critical hit chance definitely would serve this capstone well, or even going the Stabbomancer, which specializes in crits, but we'll go through different combinations later. Then we have the Spore Warden. Now, the Spore Warden's class feat is having a mushroom companion out, and it deals poison damage. Though if you ping an enemy, the mushroom will lunge towards them. We have the two action skills. We have Barrage. The Fate Maker summons an ethereal bow, firing 7 arrows that deal ability damage on impact, but they're kind of like Jacob's bullets as they ricochet twice between nearby enemies. Well, Jacob's only ricocheted once, but this one does it twice. And Barrage has multiple charges. Increasing gun damage applies damage to the Barrage. Then we have Blizzard. The Fate Maker creates 3 Frost Cyclones for a duration that seek out nearby enemies, dealing Frost ability damage over time. The first tier, Bounty of the Hunt, which is a kill skill. Action skill cooldown rate is increased for a brief duration. Then we have Kindred Heart. Companion health is increased, companion damage is increased, good for a companion build. Then we have gun damage is increased and gun handling is increased. The next tier, ability damage is increased. Your mushroom companion will occasionally let one rip, taunting enemies and leaving a poison cloud that deals damage over time. So for 1 point, you can make your mushroom fart. Why not? Then we have gun critical hit chance is increased, companion critical hit chance is increased as well. On the third tier, we have magazine size increase, and the Fate Maker's currently equipped weapon regenerates ammo over time, so good for those Vlad kind of weapons with lots of ammo. And for a single point, while the Fate Maker is in Save Your Soul, their mushroom companion will attempt to revive them. If it does, you and your companion will gain increased damage dealt for a duration. Now, I hope they've improved the companion AI from Borderlands, because I know that this ability, or a similar ability as this, didn't work every time. Then we have Windrunner, kill skill, increased movement speed, and fire rate for a duration. This effect can stack. Then we have Tier 4, Thrill of the Hunt. Gun critical hits grant increased companion damage for a duration. This effect can stack up to 10 times. Called Shot. While aiming down the sights, the Fate Maker gains ever increasing amount of gun damage and gun damage reduction. On Tier 5, we have whenever a Fate Maker deals ability damage to an enemy, the affected enemy takes increased damage from all sources for a duration. Definitely Wrath of Nature stacking quite heavily with Barrage since it has multiple charges. Then we have Headhunter. Just for 1 point, gun damage dealt to critical hit areas is increased. Very powerful. And the capstone, Play the Angles. The Fate Maker's gun critical hits have a chance to ricochet, dealing reduced ability damage to nearby enemies. Ricocheted shots have a small chance to ricochet an additional time. So, Spore Warden is going to be really good with guns, especially with the black powder guns, which are essentially Jacob's weapons, which deal a lot of damage and ricochet on critical hits. And the final class is this Stabbomancer, with the class feat being a flat 30% increased critical hit chance. Very powerful, if not boring. Then they have the action skills Ghost Blade and From the Shadows. From the Shadows just turns you stealth, and while you're stealth, you can't be seen by enemies, and all of your attacks are critical hits, but the critical hits do less damage. And Ghost Blade deals damage based on your currently equipped melee weapon by sending out an ethereal spinning blade that can be redirected by aiming somewhere else and casting it again. It's quite powerful because your melee weapon might be frost damage, for example, and that will just deal frost damage to everything in the spinning blade. The first tier of passive skills, melee damage is increased, spell damage is increased, gun damage is increased, just a flat increase. Then we have haste, melee attack speed is increased, movement speed is increased. When you cast a spell, double this burst for a duration. Then we have potent poisons, status effect damage is increased, and the status effect duration is increased. Then for the second tier, we have whenever the Fate Maker deals gun damage to an enemy, increase the damage of your next melee attack. This effect can stack, and melee attacks consume all stacks. So a melee build. Swift Death. While moving, the Fate Maker deals increased damage dealt. The faster the Fate Maker moves, the greater these bonuses. Exploit their weakness. Whenever the Fate Maker applies a status effect to an enemy, the affected enemy takes increased damage from all sources for its duration. This effect can stack per unique status effect. Then we have the third tier, Nimble Fingers. Whenever the Fate Maker deals melee damage, their fire rate and their spell damage are increased for a duration. Then we have for 1 point, Shadow Step. It's a kill skill. The Fate Maker's next melee attack is a guaranteed critical hit for a short duration. Then we have the fourth tier, just flat critical hit damage is increased. Then for 1 point, you can now shoot and sprint at the same time. You might remember this from Borderlands. Getting a chance to evade incoming damage while moving. The faster you move, the greater the chance. Then whenever a Fate Maker applies a status effect, there's a chance it spreads to nearby enemies. If no enemies are nearby, deal a percentage of the status effect's total damage to the enemy instead. So you can make those status effects quite strong. Then we have the fifth tier, 1,000 Cuts. Critical hits grant the Fate Maker increased damage dealt for a duration. This effect can stack up to 10 times. Melee critical hits grant additional stacks. Then for 1 point, melee critical hits apply a random status effect. Very interesting. Then the capstone, gun and spell critical hits have a chance to create an ethereal blade above the target that will impale them after a short delay. Ethereal blades deal melee damage based on the Fate Maker's equipped melee weapon. Very interesting. So those are all 6 classes. Now let's talk about how exactly they work together and what kind of builds we can come up with. So the first build I want to talk about is the Spellshot. This build focuses around casting specifically frost spells and slowing your enemies. So you will be using as an action skill the polymorph ability, which lets you polymorph a target and then cast a spell instantly that you have equipped, which will be frost. And using the Brrzerker's class feat, Rage of the Ancients, it makes all of your damage dealt frost damage when you cast an action skill and you get those stacking rage buffs. Now, the main thing you want to get when you've dual classed is you want to pick up Ancestral Frost, which just flat increases your frost damage. You also want to pick up Icebreaker, which increases damage dealt to slowed enemies, and almost everything is going to be slowed around you, considering that you will be casting and dealing a lot of frost damage. And then in the third tier, you want to grab Cold Snap. Movement speed is increased, but most prominently, frost efficiency is increased, which means they will be freezing more often. And while in rage, which will happen a lot, this effect is doubled. Then you just want to get things which increase your spell cooldown, your ability cooldown. You also want to get just flat damage and spell damage from your Spellshot abilities, like, for example, Spell Sniper. So this was a very, very simple build. I'm not going to dive too deeply into what you should get for the Spellshot, because the rest is really up to you. It's all about equipping a powerful frost-based spell and stacking that frost damage. The next build uses the Graveborn. This is a pet companion build. You can actually swap in the Clawbringer within any of these 2 classes here, but the Clawbringer's bonuses to companions only start tier 4. So it might not be the best secondary to pick up, but maybe if it's your primary, then do combine it with the Graveborn or the Spore Warden. So starting with the Graveborn, you'll have your always on Demi-Lich companion, and you'll want to pick up Faithful Thralls, which lets you deal bonus damage for every companion you have, and you will have 2 to start with, and maybe even more. Harvest, which is a kill skill, your companions deal bonus dark magic damage for a duration. This effect can stack, so all your companions will get bonuses from this. Then you have Dread Covenant. A portion of the damage taken is redirected to the Demi-Lich, so this is just going to make you tankier, and since you'll have 2 companions out, it's good to have. But the main thing is Dark Hydra. See, this will summon Dark Hydra companions, which is going to further boost your Faithful Thralls even more. They just so happen to do dark magic ability damage as well, which you can buff up. Then we have Punishment. It's a simple 1-point investment which makes your Demi-Lich cast Hellish Blast more often. It's definitely what you want, and you don't really need to invest further down the Graveborn's line. So we jump over to the Spore Warden here, and besides getting the Mushroom Companion, which just helps for this build immediately, we have a lot of companion-based passive skills. Kindred Heart, for example, gives all your companions increased health and gives them increased damage. So that's going to apply to your Hydras as well, which is absolutely nuts. Then we have Spore Cloud for 1 point, which just lets your Mushroom taunt. So now enemies won't be hitting your other companions, your Mushroom being more tanky, it won't be hitting you, and it'll deal poison damage over a duration. It also increases your companion critical hit chance with Bullseye. And then we have, while in Save Your Soul, your Mushroom Companion will attempt to revive you. So now you have 2 ways of staying alive because of your companions. Your Lich will keep you alive and your Mushroom will keep you alive. So this pet build is very powerful and it's going to make you very, very tanky. Then in terms of action skills, it's really up to your playstyle and what you want to use. Reaper of Bones might be good to keep you alive while your minions deal their damage. So that's a third way of staying alive and surviving lethal damage. So that's the companion build. An alternate build with the Grave Warden is going specifically for kill skills. So grab everything that gives you a kill skill and then pick up the capstone, which makes it so casting a spell automatically activates all of the Fate Maker's kill skills. So with the Spore Warden, it has a few beneficial ones. The action skill cooldown rate is increased when you kill, and finally the movement speed and your fire rate is increased for duration with Windrunner. So that's another combination you can have. The next one is an obvious one, the Stabbomancer. This is all about melee damage, as all 4 of their abilities seem to benefit from melee damage weapons, and they all have passive skills that apply an increased melee damage, especially in the Stabbomancer's tree. Seems to be melee damage and melee attack speed and things that benefit from melee attacks quite a lot in this tree. It also is a bonus that since you'll be doing a lot of frost damage and freezing targets, you'll be getting that 3 times damage bonus from hitting frozen targets. So this overall doesn't need an explanation. It's very straightforward. Do you want to be casting, I guess, in terms of your capstone, your abilities more often, or do you want to benefit from crits? You really need to make that decision yourself, but in terms of passive abilities, you just select the ones that benefit melee, and you're going to be fairly happy with the Brrzerker. Next up is the Stabbobringer. This is all about spreading status effects and dealing damage via your abilities. So you would want to invest heavily in your attribute attunement, and you want to be using the ability Cleansing Flames, or you'd want to be using the ability Ghost Blade, depending on which direction you want to go and which you prefer aesthetically. Then you want to be putting points into Potent Poisons, which increases status effect damage and duration. Then you want to be putting a point into Exploit Their Weakness to further that status effect chain. Then pick this one up as well. It's going to increase that status effect chain. And then you want to pick up Melee Critical Hits, apply a random status effect. You'll notice that you get just 30% flat critical hit chance, and both the Ghost Blade and your Cleansing Flames and even Storm Dragon's Judgment deal melee damage based on your melee ability. So if they crit, you're gonna get that spread. So it's gonna stack that way with your ability. Then you've got Executioner's Blade. Gun and spell critical hits have a chance to create an ethereal blade, which will impale them. Ethereal blades deal melee damage, so you pump that melee damage up. You pump up your fire damage over in the passive skills of the Clawbringer with Oath of Fire. You pump up elemental damage as well. You pump up the action skill cooldown rate, and your gravy. It's just all about throwing in a massive cleansing flame, hitting everything with a melee damage crit, spreading fire, poison, electric, every status effect because of the Stabbomancer. So this is about action skills, is about melee damage, even though you don't necessarily need to be hitting in melee, and this is about, well, burning your enemies down. Next up is the Spore Shot. This one's all about gun damage and stacking everything to do with increasing your effectiveness with weapons. Now, the barrage ability gets an increased damage based on your gun damage. So we will just be stacking that with both the Spore Warden and the Spellshot. So pick up everything that helps with gun damage, gun handling, reload speed, action skill cooldowns. Pick all of those up. Then we have Wrath of Nature, we have Headhunter, and finally the capstone, gun critical hits have a chance to ricochet. If you go back to the Spellshot, you have a lot of things that help boost up your effectiveness with weapons. So magic bullets, for example, action skill cooldown rate, gain fire rate. Whenever a Fate Maker casts a spell, the guns deal bonus damage of the spell's element. Kill skill that instantly reloads their weapon. Whenever you deal a critical hit with a spell, deal bonus damage equal to your gun's element. Gain increased gun damage per spell weaving stack. So there's a lot to combine here. So if you're all about slinging the occasional spell and shooting things in the face, or slinging the additional ability and shooting things in the face, this is the combination for you. I feel another obvious one is the Spellborn. This is all about slinging spells and dealing dark magic. Since both the Graveborn and the Spellshot have a lot of skill tree passives that increase spell damage in some way, the Spellshot being the obvious one with spell weaving ability, and passives like Spell Sniper and Front of Mana. Almost every single passive in some way or another benefits from casting spells, as we can see. Then if we go over to the Graveborn, you want to pick up things like Essence Drain. You want to pick up Dark Pact to increase your dark magic damage. You want to pick up Harvest. You want to pick up Stain of the Soul. You want to pick up Dark Hydra, Last Gasp, and you might even want to pick up Morheim's Blessing. But that's really up to you. You really can't go wrong with these two classes together, as they kind of synergize very, very well. The next build I want to go through is the Brrzerker. Basically, this build is all about being as tanky as possible. So what you want to do is use Reaper of Bones as your ability, and then for your skills, you just want to put everything into your increasing your maximum health and your leech. So it's all about staying alive, and surprisingly the Graveborn does this very well with the Brrzerker, as the Brrzerker increases its health and regenerates its missing health with its skills. With unarmored defense, you actually increase your maximum health by quite a lot. Your kill skills actually increase your maximum health, and that obviously stacks very well with the Graveborn. And there's a lot of different tanky abilities that you have within the Brrzerker as it is. Don't forget you also have Dread Covenant, which keeps you alive via the Demi Lich. You have Ascension, which increases your maximum health. And then you have Morheim's Blessing, which refreshes those kill skills, which do boost your tankiness up to further levels. So this is all about getting really tanky, regenerating your health at all times, and just being a pain in the ass to kill. Now there are a ton more builds I could run through, but for the sake of time I won't. For example, the Spellshot can stack very well with the Clawbringer and focus primarily around spells that deal fire damage or spells that deal lightning damage. You could also stack the Spellshot with the Graveborn and make the Lich continually cast its Hellish Blast. By spamming spells that have a high amount of charges, it's just going to continually cast that Hellish Blast, and many more. But Expect videos in the future being more specific. As of right now, thank you so much for watching. Let me know below what classes you're picking up come release, what combinations, what kind of build, what kind of weapons you're going to be looking for. Let me know everything below. Do the typical YouTube stuff, it helps out a lot. And for everything RPG and Wonderlands, you're in the right place. Ciao, friends.